Hello, my name is 𝙲𝚘𝚙𝚎𝚛, and in this video I thought with the FIFA World Cup and everything starting last weekend that there was a great time to kind of show some of the wackier connections I've found between Nika and actually the FIFA World Cup, and in particular the former Argentinian superstar Diego Maradona. And I know that that sounds absolutely bonkers, so just as a, just a little teaser for some of the rest of the video towards the end, the name Maradona of Diego Maradona actually means Lady of the Sea, which I think could be a huge reference to the Lady of the Lake and where Excalibur and came from for King Arthur and all that stuff. And just like how King Arthur was literally kind of chosen by God by being chosen to wield and pull out the sword Excalibur from the stone, I believe that who the straw hat is worn by is a very similar type of chosen by fate or God or 𝙲𝚘𝚙𝚅𝚎, GODA, whatever symbol. And now to kind of tie into all that stuff, in Japanese, the name 𝙲𝚘 means small rice paddy, which I think has huge ties to kind of the self-cleaning processes of rice paddy fields and their ties to artificial catfish and carps and all that stuff. But I will have future videos on that thing. But in Hebrew, 𝙲𝚘 actually means, the name 𝙲𝚘 actually means praise God. And also, of course, too, in Norse, 𝙲𝚘 actually meant point. So all of this with the name 𝙲𝚘, I think, is kind of referencing 𝙲𝚘 and how in the story he kind of, obviously as the writer, has chosen the main character and has chosen the character designated by fate to kind of save the world in some way. But more importantly, I think that he's actually referencing a goal from the FIFA World Cup in 1986 known as the Hand of God. And so if I haven't lost you already, this would be a great time to say please like and subscribe and comment and all that stuff on the video. My name is 𝙲𝚘𝚙𝚎𝚑, and this video is kind of going to be dealing with some of the craziness tied between Nika and being chosen by the Hand of GODA. Now, something I actually think that's really kind of funny and interesting with that whole Hand of God idea is the letters, make hog, okay? And if you ever looked at the gum fruit in as depth as I have, in the anime and all the official anime images or whatever, when we look at the top of the stem, we actually see that there are two little slits in the nose part that look extremely like the snout of a hog or a pig. And now while I do think that there's a huge chunk of the straw hat that kind of ties into pagan flower crowns and kind of being designated as a sacrifice in some way or some sort of a fuel to be used as a, fuel for a fire, and maybe sadly kind of tying into the idea of sacrificial cows or pigs at the altar or offerings to God in some way like that, and especially tying into the old pagan rituals of May Day queens, and tied to the idea that the straw hat wearer may be in some way tied to kind of a torch bearer, maybe in relation to like the Olympic flames and stuff. I talk more about that in this video here if you want to check out more about the Olympic flame torch bearer thing being tied to the fuel of the straw hat. But
you were serious about that?
I think all of that is something, but I think that's just one half of it. Maybe that's like the moon half of the, straw hat symbology. This video is going to be dealing with much more of the positive aspect of it and kind of some funner ties that it has, especially to the FIFA World Cup, which we've seen all over the place that 𝙲𝚘 really loves soccer. And from the very beginning, when it comes to Luffy and wanting to be a captain, it's never really sat right with me because he really doesn't want to control or dictate or conquer most things. He just kind of wants to be free and have fun and all that stuff or whatever. But I believe that him wanting to be a captain is kind of all tied to this soccer idea and this football captain position. And then in pre-time skip especially, he constantly kind of wore an armband in the exact position where the captain's armband goes on a soccer team. And I believe that that's all a reference to this FIFA World Cup Diego Maradona Hand of God thing, which is what we're going to get into now. And now Zoro has also wore an armband in that same exact soccer football captain spot as well, which I think is a huge clue to kind of, sadly, the final villain of the whole series once he's unlocked and awakened in some way. But we're not going to be touching on that here. We're going to be touching on more of the fun aspects of this FIFA World Cup and the Golden Boy Nika clues, all tied to Diego Maradona, and not so much the hidden bounty hunter of the series who literally builds up his prey to be at its peak and most ripe.
You were serious about that?
And I'm totally just kidding. I think that that's much more in line with what maybe Nami is being forced to do. I actually think when it comes to Zoro, I think that Shanks may be claiming his missing left arm back in some way, and perhaps maybe taking Zoro's at some point for the endgame. But we'll touch more on Shanks in a second.
I think I went too far with this one. I have to go to the bank today. What am I supposed to tell people in line? I had good news and bad news? Come on, Craig. Get your life together.
Now in Robin's introduction, she actually wears a armband on her left arm as well, which I think is a huge clue to the various parts and aspects of, you know, creator gods and deities and joy boys and all this sorts of stuff. And you have to check out my next video that I'm working on after this one, which is my idea of evil thing, where I kind of go into that and kind of how in this cover, all those three aspects of captains might be vying for control here in the background. And I think there's many other characters. Nami wears one for a while, Vivi wears one for a while. All the Straw Hats kind of have that X mark the spot on their arm in Alabasta. I think that the captain armband thing is huge, but Luffy's I think is the biggest, especially since his was actually literally called Captain John's treasure map armband thing. I think all kind of referencing this football signature. And I think actually what's a much more important question than who all in the series has worn one of these armbands is, in Chapter 1 with Shanks, did he lose his captain armband? Or was the armband that's used to bandage up his arm after losing it saving Luffy, was that him gaining a captain's armband? We'll touch on that in other videos.
You were serious about that?
I have been reading One Piece for over 2/3 of my entire life, or over 20 years now. I have been reading the One Piece manga, and when chapter 1018 came out, where we first found out the name of Nika, and we were first kind of told an official legend about this sun god Nika. It didn't take long for the obvious connections of the Nika being tied to the Nike, or Nika, Greek god of victory, Greek goddess of victory. But I've kind of been looking into this the last couple weeks. It's pretty hardcore. I found some really funny kind of ties to this Nika thing, which we're going to go over in this video. And I guarantee you haven't seen this stuff anywhere, but it's so crazy. Just give the video a chance because it's hilarious. And I think personally, it is probably one of the biggest things being hinted at with the Nika stuff. Now, on the One Piece wiki, for the Nika page, they have all sorts of ties and trivia about what the Nika connection may be and where the word may come from. And I think all those are valid. The idea of a sun god, this thing with the trees, a toothy grin, I think all of these are extremely valid and in some way are being touched on with the idea of this Nika fruit or this Nika sun god character that Oda has come up with. But we're just going to focus on the idea of Nika and victory. This tie between the name Nika, Nike, and victory, and playing sports and having a winner and a loser. Now, according to that same One Piece wiki article, Nika is an alternate way to say Nike. Well, whatever. I'm just going to say Nike for the sake of this video. But looking at the Nike shoe logo, it's obviously a parallel to the winged shoes of Hermes, okay? Which makes a lot of sense because I think in the One Piece community, there's so much emphasis placed on the perhaps magical abilities of the Straw Hat, and we've never once taken time to consider where Luffy's straw sandals have come from, and how he's always had those. They seem to be able to withstand tremendous amounts of wear and tear, and they followed Luffy on his journey the entire time, and all sorts of stuff tied to those, and even going back to when Kaido originally said, you know, Luffy couldn't be Joy Boy, and I do not really believe that Joy Boy and Nika are 100% connected, but Kaido seemed to equate Joy Boy and the idea of not being able to walk on the sky as something. To me, the moment where he dropped Luffy and said you can't be Joy Boy either, he is saying that after, you know, for sure seeing that Luffy cannot fly or float in this moment at least, which I think could be huge, especially kind of playing with the idea that Nika can kind of be an anagram and all this stuff for Anakin in terms of like Anakin Skywalker or Anakin Starkiller. But going back to the word Nika, looking at these word definitions, and that's kind of the bread and butter, as my friend Elson always says, a thesaurus is a treasure. The words mean the same thing and they break down to be the same words. And looking at the origins of the ancient Greek word Nike, we get a word Viking, which looks a lot like Viking, which used to mean victory. Now, that word's definition was things won in victory, the fruits of victory, and the upper hand or the advantage, okay? Now, keep that in mind. So looking into the word victory, it mainly stems from the name Victor, which means conqueror, vanquisher, or the victor, winner, champion, stuff like that. So I think the idea of conqueror's hockey and all this stuff is being, kind of hinted at with this Nika name and everything with Victor. And looking a little bit deeper into the definition of victory, it can mean three things, an instance of having won a competition, the condition of having succeeded in a conflict or an effort, but it also can refer to a winged figure representing victory, which was common in the Roman official iconography. And the Wiktionary page offers up to bring you to a page of a piece of art from ancient Greece called the Winged Victory of Samothrace, or it's called the Nike of Samothrace. Now, this statue is, a great work of art. It's been in the Louvre. It's been all over the world, seen all throughout, since it's been made, basically. But the monument itself, if you count the kind of rock base at the bottom, is 5.57 meters tall, which all those numbers are obviously very tied to Luffy when we look at all these things and stuff. But this idea of a winged, and I would argue that this winged victory stuff could be a thinly veiled reference to the idea of being chosen by above or by gods to be the victor, like being chosen from high to be victorious against your enemies type deal, is what I believe this statue, could be representing, or at least what Oda might be viewing it as, in regards to the context he's using for the naming of Nika.
The suspense is terrible. I hope it'll last.
Going back to that word that looked a lot like the Viking word, Viking, the act of winning, and then a subcategory of the definition is the upper hand or an advantage. Now, I think the idea of God kind of choosing the victor and fate and luck being forms of God showing favor or choosing the victor in the One Piece story is at play to every extreme it can possibly be. That seems to be at play with fate choosing to help out Luffy throughout the story. But I think it could be referencing something even crazier. Now, I personally think that all of these pineal gland things that I think are at the bottom of the Nika figure's foot, I think that all of this stuff is, a representation of the enlightenment and knowledge of the sun. But right now in the One Piece world, it's kind of been turned on its head and it's used as a weapon. It's used as kind of a force to keep the oppressors above. The Nika coming down with the spear. When it comes to symbolism, swords can mean lots of things. Shields can mean lots of things. Not always attack or not always, something violent with both of those. But a spear or an arrowhead are usually pretty universally weapon symbols. And I personally think that spear idea is getting touched on here with the Nika silhouette. Now, I also think it's a huge reference to Stanley Kubrick and Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Atomic Bomb.
Hello? Hello, Dimitri. Listen, I can't hear too well. Do you suppose you could turn the music down just a little?
And we got that in the Reverie. There's a complete recreation of the shot of the nations in the war room at the Reverie with all of the various nations and the kings of each power kind of sitting at this table. The shots look very, very similar. And I think the idea of kind of riding the nuclear bomb to mutually assure destruction is what, at least the old forms of what Nika maybe did in the story, and maybe exactly what happened in the past when the two sovereigns or whatever met, which I do think one version of was, perhaps the meeting of the Earth and the Sun, or the Earth and the Moon, which would kind of annihilate all Earth on the surface for the most part in the, any world, but the One Piece world probably too. But Oda, we know he's a sports fan, okay? And when it comes to sports, there's usually always a winner and a loser. It doesn't take very long to see how much of a sports fan he is. It's on the first page of the One Piece manga. Oda's personal Jolly Roger sigil has these baseball lines on, and he's even introduced the idea of baseball-looking balls with the same stitching in the One Piece world in the Alabasta saga when we saw that, you know, Mr. Four's dog Lasso. Now, in the translations, the dog is noted as being his beloved pet, and the word beloved is also the same meaning that the name David has, and David kind of being a beloved, sort of favored agent of God who's equipped with weapons to deal with a monster and deal with some force, I think, you know, really is at play here as far as, you know, what's going on, especially with the name Lasso, kind of maybe the idea of putting a lasso around a celestial body and pulling it, you know, forcing it to come and make contact with Earth, I think could be at play here. There's all sorts of crazy stuff.
You were serious about that?
But going along with the sports idea, as much as Oda loves baseball, he loves soccer the most. One of the first kind of author avatars he used with the Show and Jump stuff was him with a soccer ball head. He's had some covers of the Straw Hats playing soccer, and I think that soccer, I apologize to my European viewers. I'm an American. I watch American football, so to me I call that football, and then I call soccer. I apologize. I do watch FIFA World Cup and all that stuff, but I call it soccer. I'm sorry. But when it comes to soccer, there's one kind of play that stands above all other plays. One golden goal that has been immortalized, and that moment has been forever remembered in the history and annals of the World Cup lore. And that play is literally called the Hand of God. And now, I don't think it really takes too much imagination, but here's a picture of that play, and here's the Nika picture. To me, very, very similar, especially with the idea that maybe the background of a sun or the moon is the ball, and this figure is literally touching it or grabbing it, especially considering all the stuff Luffy seems to grab at the end of this arc after transforming into Gear 5. But let's look at this a little bit deeper, because it's really going to blow your mind. This is some really crazy stuff, and the clues just kind of kept adding up, and I just had to make this video. So the Hand of God play was Argentina versus England in the 1986 FIFA World Cup, where Argentina was playing England, and Argentina actually ended up winning the FIFA World Cup this year after defeating England in this quarterfinal match. And Argentina won, and the majority of Argentina's national team's success when it came to soccer in the 80s was largely due to one of the greatest soccer players of all time, Diego Maradona, the Golden Boy. Now, Diego Maradona was the star player. He, you know, troubled individual, very, very sordid history off the pitch. But when it came to playing the game of soccer, you know, he's up there with Pele as regarded as one of the greatest of all time. And when it came to the FIFA World Cup in particular, that world stage is where Diego Maradona shined the brightest and played the best football of his career. But when it comes to the play itself, the actual Hand of God goal, let's take a look at this. Now, I'm not sure about all the copyright stuff, so I'm going to try to include the actual play. So let's take a look at it here. Now, for Diego Maradona, this game in particular is perhaps the greatest game that he's ever played, but maybe the greatest game that anyone's ever played in the history of the FIFA World Cup. But as important as the Hand of God goal is, actually, he has another goal in the game to win it, and that goal is called the goal of the century. So, I mean, this entire game was loaded with crazy, memorable moments for the soccer world. But this is the first goal to go up 1-0 against England in the second half. And Diego Maradona is essentially going to almost single-handedly score against England. Now, it's going to be interesting, though, how he does it if you've never actually seen how exactly Diego Maradona scores this goal. So let's look at this play. Here's the play starts off. This is Diego Maradona. He repossesses the ball, dribbles it through some people. Now, actually, it's because of an error here by the defender. He actually pops the ball back to Diego Maradona, where he jumps higher than the goalie does and uses his left hand to bump the ball into the goal, okay? Basically using his hand to bat the soccer ball into the goal. A blatant act disregarding the rules and breaking, the fundamental rule of soccer, using your hand. Now, this moment is super interesting because the picture even proves that Diego Maradona is touching the ball with his hand. But it's kind of one of those things. It's a good example of what I think we're talking about here, being chosen by God. Because in this moment, in this Coliseum, the people have chosen the victor with the cheers. And the moment is so big. Yes, this moment technically he was cheating. He touched it with his hand. But it was such a great, cool moment that it was allowed. The entire play and goal was so beautiful that, a referee wasn't going to break it up even if they wanted to. And of course, the official story is none of the referees on the field had a proper view of that moment, so they couldn't quite see the hand touching it or whether it was his head or not. But I think that idea is what Oda's kind of playing with when it comes to being chosen by God as the victor. That almost in a way, the magical amount of effort and luck involved in something, if the moment is, kind of going back to the rule of cool idea, if the moment's great enough, it has to be. Even if to do so requires the help of or the interference maybe of a celestial being helping a favored individual. But it really gets crazier. Now, Maradona himself was actually quoted as saying that this game was a symbolic revenge from Argentina against England over their loss in the Falkland Wars that actually happened in 1982, 4 years before this match. And actually, in 2005, considering all the stuff that maybe Joy Boy was in the future, or these poneglyphs were at least written to prophesize the future, when asked about the goal, Maradona's quote about being asked if he wanted to apologize to England for quote unquote cheating, he said, so the story is already written. Nothing can change it. History is already written type deal. In regards to whether that goal and entire victory and game and validity of that entire World Cup for Argentina was warranted, Maradona's basically saying, it's 20 years later, it is what it is. It happened already, which could be very similar to this prophesied victory by Joy Boy that seems to literally be set in stone in the One Piece world. But of course, this interview was published after the first appearance of the poneglyphs in the One Piece story. So I just thought it was a little bit of an interesting tidbit considering what we're about to get into now. Now, the Argentinian player that scored the Hand of God goal, Diego Maradona's full name is Diego Armando Maradona. Now, the name Diego, and this is a huge clue for when it comes to A Song of Ice and Fire books and stuff with the Jaime Lannister name. Jaime means supplanter. The name Diego also means supplanter. So someone who might overthrow an evil god, chosen by God to overthrow an evil god power, I think could be at play. Armando is a pretty crazy name where it actually means small army man, a soldier. And where it really gets crazy is the name Maradona actually means Lady of the Sea. So this idea that the sea creatures or the people of the sea, the fishermen, are trying to reclaim their spot in the sun, or maybe use the sun as a weapon on the surface and they're safe in the water maybe. But I think there's a lot going on. Because as I've kind of said in other videos of mine, if the red line was destroyed, how the popular theories kind of propose that it will be dealt with, that would cause massive flooding on a global scale and essentially flood the entire world. And really the only people that would kind of benefit and live through that would be the fishermen. But that's for future videos. And I've seen a lot of stuff kind of going back to all the 𝚲𝚙𝚎 and 𝚲𝚙𝚎 god sacrifices and stuff like that. And when it comes to 𝚲𝚙𝚎 and 𝚲𝚙𝚎, obviously there are tons of Aztec parallels. This idea that the Aztec culture and Mesoamerica culture is kind of being highlighted and shown in these arcs. Well, the stadium that the Hand of God game took place in was actually Aztec Stadium. More specifically, Estadio Azteca, located in Mexico City. So I think that really ties into this idea of maybe which party was chosen by God in the past when it came to the winged people in Shandia and maybe other godly races and all sorts of stuff in the One Piece world's history. And all of these winged things, including the Hermes shoes, I think is Oda's kind of tying them back to this victory statue, the Nika of Victory again, where it's a one-winged angel type figure made out of marble, Parian marble. But going back to Diego Maradona, it still kind of gets crazier. Diego Maradona's nickname is El Pibe de Oro, the Golden Boy. So kind of gives me vibes of maybe where the name Oro Jackson came from, or Oars maybe. Obviously, Oda is playing with a million things with those words. I'm not saying that it's just from this, but the fact that it actually ties into this, mind-boggling. Obviously, Diego Maradona was a true 10. He wore the number 10 on the field. Luffy has lots of references to being 10 or an X, Diaz, all that stuff. And just to get next level kind of crazy, kind of deal with the straw hat and maybe that kind of being a symbol that maybe directs where the favor from God is being sent, where that energy of good luck is being sent to, is whoever is in possession of the hat, kind of holding the ball, like dribbling it in soccer or basketball or whatever. I think that Oda is kind of using that as maybe a way to tie being chosen by God and victory into a symbol. And obviously the straw hat represents the idea of a sun disk and the halos that sun deities have and crowns and stuff like that. But I also think he's playing around with the circular shape of the straw hat and, various times Luffy becomes a balloon to be a ball or rubber ball type thing. When it comes to ancient cultures, somehow the earliest artifacts that have officially been found on the earth this time are rubber balls. They were put in grave sites. They were put as they were used for sports, but they were used for all sorts of ritual sacrifices and symbolic offerings to the gods to gain favor all the time. And I think Oda's kind of taken that to the extreme here, to where this kind of straw hat ball, which we even in 1054 we saw Shanks with the whole equating the straw hat to the sun stuff, and I really think it's more the moon maybe, but the idea that the hat is related to some sort of celestial body, whether it be the moon, the sun, or other planets, I think is being played with here about as far as it can go. And then ultimately, just to kind of tie it back to some grounded One Piece kind of ideas, I think for Oda, the idea of being chosen by God is a deus ex machina. Literally, the end of Lord of the Rings is a deus ex machina, where they're saved by the eagles when they're taken from the volcano in Mordor. Tolkien himself has stated that was, a deus ex machina to have a happy ending. And I think that Oda kind of has very much the same kind of mindset when it comes to the story in the One Piece world. I think that no matter how outnumbered and outmatched and how powerful the enemies are, as a author and a manga artist, especially for children's genres, there's an inherent kind of desire and want and need to have a happy ending. And sometimes that boils down to, even if it takes the author needing to save the character sometimes. And we've kind of seen that throughout the story with Oda's hesitancy to kill off characters. But really, I actually think that Luffy in the story marks people to be given favor by God and to live through things. But that'll be for future videos. But I think when it comes to Shonen Jump especially, there's a need for a happy ending maybe. And I don't think it's going to be all happy and all sorts of great things like that. I do think, though, that, there's some sort of writing will that, wants to have a happy story. But I think that idea kind of extends, and that will transcends all forms of media, because the idea of falling in love with your characters and letting them control the world and dictate the actions and stuff is great. That's out, every writer wants to work at, have the characters be so alive they're making their own decisions type deal. But at the end of the day, I think there's also a drive that you want to see these characters happy and survive and succeed in their endeavors. And I think that Oda's constantly kind of battling with himself between that devil that wants to, blow everything up, and then the angel that kind of wants to have a happy children's story in a lot of ways. But to end this video, I think Oda plays around a ton with language, obviously, but with the way words sound. And watching that clip of I didn't play the sound, but if you listen to the sound on YouTube, the way that the British announcers pronounce the word referees sounds exactly like reveries. So I looked into the word for referee a little bit deeper than I guess I ever had before. It actually stems from the Latin word refero, which was to bear or carry. That's what fero means. Looking more and more at the definitions, a lot of them are like I retreat, I tell, recount, or narrate. I bring back or restore or renew or revive, repeat. All sorts of definitions like that when it comes to the base word for referee. But this idea of bringing something back and retrieving something, I think is at play across the One Piece universe, especially when it kind of comes to the idea of being a torchbearer with continuing wills and perhaps trying to accomplish goals in the future that were unable to be accomplished in the past. Stuff like that, kind of being a torchbearer of wills and maybe carrying a will back to its original source type of deal, or maybe original resting place. And I think the idea of being a judge or a bishop type deal when it comes to deciding the fate of, the world and mankind and stuff like that maybe in the One Piece world, that power has been taken over by perhaps someone who, is not so deserving of that favor. And the story we've seen is kind of reclaiming that in a lot of ways. But going back to the idea of the Straw Hat, this object or ball that essentially has dictated the entirety of the story from chapter 1. Shanks giving Luffy the straw hat and telling him, return this to me, is kind of almost like pass him the ball, give me the ball back later on when we're closer to the goal maybe. I think all this is huge when it comes to what the point of the straw hat is and exactly why it was given to Luffy and for what purpose. And this kind of refereeing stuff, I really think actually ties into all that stuff, considering it's kind of, it seems like it is a signal for fate to kind of either have a blind spot for who's under the hat or to be highlighted as maybe a signal for, God or Oda or whatever to constantly throw their hand in to interfere with fate and, steer it towards a happier conclusion. The straw hat kind of being that identifier of favor, I think, is a major aspect of the One Piece story. Since the moment Luffy showed up on the scene, the 𝚲𝚘 had a picture of him in their hands. Since the moment Imu showed up, they had a picture of him in their hands. Every single important player in the One Piece world notices Luffy. And I think a lot of them, a lot of them even say it. They notice the straw hat first. And I think that kind of being a huge clue as to why so many figures in the One Piece world pay attention to Luffy. I really wonder if it's kind of like because the hat, marks him almost like the brand from Berserk or something, kind of marks this individual to be seen by the gods, to be in their eyesight all the time and to attract their attention, almost like a golden lure or something. And to me, it's all, when you're watching a soccer game, football game, any sports game, for soccer, for instance, there's 22 people on the field, but one of them has the ball, and everyone's watching that person with the ball. And I believe that the straw hat is that soccer star attacking with the ball and kind of going on the offensive to score or accomplish a goal in some way. And I believe for Oda specifically, he's kind of using the straw hat as the ball for who he has chosen to be the main character. The straw hat is on who Oda has chosen to be the victor. Literally maybe chosen by GODA for victory in the form of being the main character of the story. This hand of God idea, this halo of favor, all these things, could I think be Oda representing that by donning Luffy with this hat, kind of this shining star or beacon to highlight Luffy and to tell his story since the beginning. Now, having said all this, obviously Luffy is right now the in-story Nika and all sorts of things like that. But ultimately, Nika is a fishman, and I think Jinbei is kind of a huge representation of it, and this idea that the fish people trying to take over the land and reclaim the sun, especially, you know, evolution coming from fish to apes to man to, you know, whatever, starting in a primordial ooze into water and stuff like that, and maybe returning to that, I think is perhaps some factions of the One Piece world what they're trying to do. Whether it be with a giant flood or whatever means they may try to reclaim the top surface of the world and the sunlight surface, including maybe playing around with the idea of flooding the surface with tense heat waves, you know, from the sun, kind of melting and destroying all life on the surface. I think, you know, even with Jinbei, with the whole, you know, sun in his chest and all that stuff, all of it, there's a lot of stuff going on there, but the idea of maybe also having some underhanded cheating aspect to this, and that maybe in the past this Nika figure was tricked or betrayed or cheated in some fashion, I am going to touch on other videos. I have some videos working behind the scenes more to this Fishman idea. It was just, you know, shocking to me that the name Maradona meant Lady of the Sea and could perhaps being played with by Oda for this entire Oda created mythology. And with that, my name is 𝙲𝚘𝚙𝚢𝚛𝚒𝚆. If you liked the video, please like and share and comment what you think. If you're a FIFA fan, if you're a sports fan, you know, I used to be really into sports before all the shutdown stuff and everything, and kind of fell out and got way more into trying to do this kind of stuff. But let me know what you think, and if this is, you know, too crazy, or if it is, you know, maybe just crazy enough for Oda to kind of use his own hand to place his favorite influences in his story and mythological structure of the One Piece world. But that's going to be it for this video. With that, my name is 𝙲𝚘𝚙𝚢𝚑𝚝, and I will talk to you all later. Bye-bye.